Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming to It's Real Because It Happened at Artspace Gallery. We are really excited for one of our first in-person gatherings since in the last few years. We're really excited it's this show that we can meet you all in. So I'd like to do just read a land acknowledgement that we are on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 territories signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas in Toronto Dominions. So this exhibition is called It's Real Because It Happened. It was curated by Christina Oyawale, featuring DEION SQUIRES-ROUSE and Ajeuro Abala. Ajeuro is an alumni of the creative schools IMA program. DEION and Christina are fourth-year IMA photo students. So this exhibition came about by through the support of our fundraising initiatives, so specifically for the BIPOC fundraiser, where we're trying to raise money to do specific targeted financial support for BIPOC artists participating with Artspace Gallery. And we do have a fundraiser now, if anyone would like to go and buy some art. So yes, this exhibition came about as a residency in the summer last year, and where we, where Christina and Ajeuro and DEION all worked together collaboratively to build a structure in the space to shoot in. And yeah, this would be a fully realized exhibition that talks about their work, collaborating together, and all the stuff. So I'm gonna sit down now. Great.
Yeah, so as Josh said, I got the amazing opportunity through the school to curate these two lovely, amazing people here. Initially came up with the idea with another Artspace co-worker named Kelsey. Just looking at how through the institution launch, there's been like a series of lack of diversity in terms of the things we're taught through inspiration for projects, and also just like lack of shows being curated by people of color, and also just lack of shows with people of color in the school and around the school that aren't directly based off of diaspora work. So that was mainly what I focused on, and I know like the three of us specifically in our own photography practices, in general arts practices, we don't necessarily love the like neoliberal term of the diaspora and focusing on like BIPOC ideologies that like white supremacy expects us to look at in our artwork. So I thought it was really important to show those things and work with them, because I feel like they're very strong representations of amazingly talented Black artists who are doing whatever the hell they want, and I respect it so much. Do you want to speak to that as well?
Yeah, I think that Christina put it really well there. I think for us, it was nice to be given the opportunity to not think so much about the end result of the individual images we were making on this project. It really felt like the residency in the summer and then the subsequent show and brainstorming and building that behind the scenes was a lot more about the process of working through a project and ideas and just things that and looking for answers to questions that we ourselves still hadn't had answers for. And that's what's been really special about the freedom that we are trying to allow ourselves in order to make work and these self-portraits, is that for us right now, it does feel a lot like just photographing moments of our lives as we're living through them, as ways to try and understand what is going on. And that's sort of the prompt that we were running with during the brainstorming, is at least maybe it's all right that we don't necessarily have a concrete endpoint per se just yet, at least when we're starting off, but we found a direction, and it's nice to feel like the direction was the sole sort of train that was carrying the work for the first little while, which allowed us to kind of get into a headspace and get into a mood, creating a lot of the work that you see here today.
Yeah, for me, my individuality comes before anything else, and like the notion that my work just ends up being a drop in a big bucket of diaspora art, like it grinds my gears, and so I don't know, when I make things, it's obviously a factor in the work, like it can't not be, but it's like it's something I try to avoid like to the highest degrees, because Black people aren't a monolith, and I don't want to be like a pebble in that giant stone wall of Black art.
Absolutely, and like that's what I really admire about this show is that like it's a constant negotiation and conversation with like existence, but like the existence of just like the human condition rather than the politicalness of the human condition as Black artists, you know, like you said, like we're not a monolith, but the act of curating you two was so interesting to me specifically because like you're doing something that's very similar in the approach, but generally the outcome of your work is so different, you know? And you can see that in the work, like the importance of like fashion and like identity in your work, both of your work, just like screams out of the images in like different ways too, which I really appreciate. Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit towards the title of the exhibition and how that came about? Because I think that was like the first moment we kind of got a direction going.
Yeah, well, I think the project that you picked from me was a series of self-portraits that I made for school at home, and I didn't really have an explanation for them. I made them, and I don't know, people always ask me, what's the meaning behind this one, what's the meaning behind this one, and I go, I don't know. I made it because I could. It's real because it happened, and so it exists. And I think something caught there, and we all figured that that was like a through line between all the thoughts that we were having and like the pieces in our work that were similar to each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's almost funny about the title is that it feels like, in many ways, at times it feels like it can be a really convenient cop-out. You can make a mistake or do something and then say, oh, it's real because it happened. I'm validating it because it is there, and I of course, I guess I did that, so. And there's something funny about that, and we have to, I guess, ride the line of not being so gimmicky that it feels comical. There's still some bit of intent there, it feels, in the way we still try to, we recognize that it can have that comical side to it, but we try to remain aware and still think critically about how it can add to it. And I think what's nice about it when we try to think about it more seriously as it pertains to a body of work that we've been putting together, and the through line, as Dion said, through all the headspaces that we've been existing in, is that you can think about it in terms of that, like when it opens up as freely as it's real because it happened, we can allow it. That's when I think for us it allowed us to take a step back and create for the sake of creating, in order to see what it is our mind was trying to kind of put onto paper or put into a photograph. Just having the freedom to make an image without an end goal per se. Not just that we're making aimless images, but I think what's special about these self-portraits is that we enter into these personas, into these headspaces with the outfits and the characters that we put on. And yet, they're still very much a part of our realities, that we would walk out in these outfits in the world. It's not some show we're putting on. And so that duality there, for me, is really interesting. And going off of the title, it's really because it happened, just allows us to create in that headspace where when you're thinking in terms of sort of where am I trying to go as opposed to this is what I'm trying to create, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think when I think about the title, like similar to what you're talking about, like the ability to try on multiple identities. Like this show shows how complex we are as humans. Like we have the public versions of ourselves and the personal versions of ourselves. And I feel like you're both completely erasing that notion, you know? Like, you're showing what it's like to be yourselves in a very public realm, like an institution, a gallery, and showing who you are on a real, like a very, very real day-to-day basis. Like, I can speak to the fact that, like, knowing both of you for a decent amount of time, that, like, this is who you are with me, and it feels so special that you're sharing that. These identities with a broader public. And I think that's how I interpret the title as well. Yeah. Questions about anything? Does anyone want to ask any questions about the space or the construction? Like, I think we can, yeah, we can speak to the construction of it as well. Like, so initially, Ajeuro thought about constructing a structure that could be used to photograph themselves in. So a lot of the images in the space, the structure that's behind you, is actually used to, like, as backdrops for a lot of these images. But also we wanted to have like a fixed thing that represents the images, but also just being in the space. I know initially your initial building of the structure was heavily inspired by Frank Ocean's Endless and Irving Penn's images, the black and white images that you see on stuff over there, and Ajero's images over there were heavily inspired by Irving Penn's images. But you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think the wall coming up was a really fun process in terms of how we were brainstorming. I remember in some of our earliest Zoom calls, DEION was thinking of having some sort of physical wall in the space if we could build a wall. So that's how it started. From there, I thought it reminded me of Irving Penn's portraits, specifically his corner portraits, where in his studio he had built this big sort of corner wall, if you will, and then had a lot of just like of the popular individuals and celebrities of the time in the 20th century come through his studio, and he photographed them really cranked and composed in this corner space, and just did it really well, lit it beautifully in black and white, and I'd always been really moved by those. And so when the opportunity came up to have a wall in the space, I thought, oh, maybe we could build our own wall, and then Josh was really helpful in getting us to look through all the materials that we could use to have set it up. We went and bought all the wood and the backing, and then brought it into the space, and then spent a day building it up, and that's what was on the videos, is just the behind the scenes of us working together to build the wall. And then from there, now we have the wall in the space, and some of those inspirations were allowed to kind of flourish in a way. It's now we can try and make some new self-portraits in the space. And what was interesting for me, none of the work here is necessarily either of us making images off of each other. It's more so, what was interesting for me is how we got together to build this wall and then had our own ways of using the space to make new self-portraits. And so you can see DEION's self-portraits, and you can see my own as well. We came in on separate days, and it was interesting to then see the photos after the fact, see how this one idea that we collectively came together to create became our starting, our base point, and then how we begin to sort of taper off in our own directions. That was really, really exciting for me. And so the wall was a big part of that. It was just the first seed to help us kind of really start moving in this direction.
What I liked about it is that it's disruptive. It gave us the opportunity to break free of the prison that is art and frames on walls. It changes the space. It breaks it up into sections. It gives it a kind of circulature, like a circuit for you to walk through. It creates a path for for you to follow, and I just like the idea of it taking up its own space. Like the walls is as much a part of the show as we are. Like it's almost its own character at this point. It's the way that it features in a lot of the photos. And then even once we took down the panels and set them up, it's become a big part of it. It could almost be a subtitle of the show. It's good because it happened featuring the wall. I don't know. It's definitely like one of the things I'll remember from it, or one of the things I like the most.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the construction of all of this is like anything I ever could have dreamed about. Because like, again, like the tradition of print frame put up on a wall is just, it's become so arbitrary, I feel, and the ability to experiment with things like vinyl printing. And I feel like this show was so special to me because of that. Like the construction is probably like one of the key factors of this. I feel like it would communicate very differently if all of the works in this were just like printed and framed and put up on the wall. Like construction is absolutely key in like giving you both the opportunity to experiment and research. Like this is basically a research base too, like with figuring out what kind of mediums work and what kind of mediums don't work. Like Ajeuro experimented with some wheat pasting too, and initially wasn't super happy about the outcome, but it ended up being amazing because like we were given the space to try and fail and keep working at a lot of things that we've always been really interested in doing. Yeah.
I think one of the nice words you use there is construction. I feel like that word has several different meanings in the context of the show. There's the construction of the wall physically, but then there's the construction of the ideas, and there's the construction of the research into us wanting to further kind of extrapolate on those ideas. Construction just exists in so many forms, both figurative and literal and imaginative in a way. And so I think I like that word construction. A lot of the show, even at its final form presently, as polished as we tried to get it to, still feels laid back and bare and rugged in a way, which leans itself well to the construction and the process. I feel like process has been a really special thing for me working through this project these past couple of months.
Well, I gotta ask. Well, were we trying to get a really polished finish on this show? Because I remember like going through it, it was pretty intentional, but both of you were insistent that we have like an industrial, like like not finished space, because it kind of became like the psychic space in which we construct images of ourselves kind of thing. Is that like,
Yeah, I think there's a big sort of emphasis on subversion in a way, just subversion from what we've come to know a lot. So it was always thinking about, all right, what are the ways we can think of off the bat of how to present. Now let's throw them aside, and what's next? What can we look at after the fact? That part of it was always a big through line for us.
Yeah.
Even down to the guest book, it's a field notes notebooks where you put all your thoughts. I thought it'd be a cute, fun, quirky way to, commemorate our movies passed through.
Yeah, to add to that too, like in terms of duration, like I love that it's an ongoing conversation between the artist and an ongoing conversation with the audience. Like personally for me, I think the importance of accessibility in art spaces, traditionally like institutional colonial spaces, there's the idea that like once art is in a space, it needs to be finished, that needs to be the period, that needs to be the end note. And there needs to be a dismantling of that because like as artists and as people, like conversations are never finished. They're ongoing. We're constantly looking at our past work, trying to figure out how we can go to the next step with those things. And I feel like this exhibition is like a perfect example of that. Like we as artists just like need to dismantle the idea that once you come up with an idea and it's realized, it's finished, because that's not at all true.
Art isn't spoken, it's speaking. It's we we threw up the print on the wall closest to the door literally like a day or two ago. We're adding things, we're taking them away, and we're trying to figure out what works for us and what we like best and how we want it to feel to other people.
I think that's important. That kind of reminds me of Tangled's show from a little while ago, Under the Rule. Tangled Art and Disability upstairs, like the idea that like for a lot of disabled artists, like there isn't the space and the ability to be able to go into art spaces and install everything in a couple hours. So adding things as time progresses to the ability is important to me as well. And I think again it comes back to like decolonizing the institutional gallery space, that like nothing ever needs to be finished, because like who gains from that? Like we're ever changing human beings, like we're constantly having conversations, like you said, like art is speaking, is like exactly like we're constantly having conversations. I think that's important.
I think what's really important to note about that is how Dion and myself felt really thankful for the opportunity that the Artspace, Josh and Christina have given us. They've allowed us that freedom to not work with such finite kind of endpoints, if you will. Each meeting was always, what's the idea? How big can we think? There are no limitations here. If we want to build something that we can't necessarily build through the roof, well, maybe we can build across the space. It was always never close the door, but how can we open the door slowly? How can we get what you want to come across? And it always felt like that. And I want to personally thank the both of you for allowing us that freedom. I think the prompt and everything that you came to the two of us with in order to start thinking about the project was super crucial and really helpful for Dion and myself to just start to be able to think about how to make it work in this space, which has been tough.
Financial limitations are definitely like a huge part of being an artist, and like imagine being able to make whatever the hell you wanted because there wasn't a cap on how much you were allowed to spend. Like we do really value like making sure that like when we commission artists to work in the space that they can dream as big as they can, and we try our best to do that here. Like we made gum pants. Like we made a structure. Like we came up with the boldest ideas we could honestly think of, and like really sat with like how can we make that happen? Because I think that's important. Like artists, curators should not be limited with their ideas by like being like, well, we only have a budget of $500. I guess we can only do this and pare it back, because like it takes away from the creativity. It takes away from an exhibition being like interesting and engaging in a lot of ways because of financial things. So like I think it's really important to find ways to make things happen, and like this is a perfect example of that. Yeah, does anyone have any specific questions they would like to ask? Like, can be about the exhibition, doesn't have to be about the exhibition, just like general questions and comments.
There are a piece that will be from children's work and portraits that you'd like to know.
I always say it's Ajeuro rebasing just because I find it interesting. Like I said, I like disruption and subversion, and it's like it's a picture, but it's a little torn at the edges, and it's a little wrinkled, and it's about to curve at the bottom. But I think it stands out the most, and it has a kind of a scary history because he didn't like it at first, but I think it came out really well, and I don't know, it's my favorite because it's different from the rest of them.
For me, I think I've been grappling between two things specifically. There's the print of Dion's ear here. That one is really special, the way it kind of sits separate in the gallery and is this large print of a small area. And then the details that people pick out from that and the colors, it's just a really nice, arresting image. It's something that can stop you in the space. And I think that's really special. It's just when you go to a show is opening yourself up to be arrested by an image or a piece, and then just seeing what feelings come up or conjured up within that and how you want to kind of use that as inspiration going forward. I feel like Deion's image here does that really beautifully. But it's a tie between that and the wall in its current form. I think for me, the big corner wall here is sort of the epitome of process and ideas and thinking through them over time and how they begin to evolve and grow bigger or smaller through time. And the wall first began as an idea to create something in a space, and then from there, just having lived with it for so long, grew into something more than that. And when we got to rebuild it for the show, we started thinking about how to further extend the wall's life in the idea of the show and how it continued to evolve. So we thought of taking the panels off and putting them in the space and then activating them with more prints to have it extend that way, but then also Deion bringing the pants in, hanging them up, and then having the smaller images and details around the space and on the wall as well, gives it another level of like a new life, if you will. And then finally, just it sitting like that with the prints hanging all together makes the wall that was at first this extremely utilitarian piece into its own sculpture that sort of exists as a piece in the space. And so that is like an evolution of the process and just encapsulates what it meant to sort of work through this project as a whole for me. So it's a tie between those two.
I mean, I want to just say what my therapy. Why not? Honestly, that frame piece at the back of Deion in a tarp dress. Honestly, your mind. But like from a glance, you're like, wow, that's so elegant. But once you actually look into the details, you can like, there's a disruption there. It's like, why the hell is he wearing a tarp? And it's like, why not? Like, honestly, I think it's one of the most beautiful pieces in the show, and also the new piece you both just worked on is absolutely amazing. Just like working with figure and movement too. Like movement is a huge thing in the images too, and the figure is a huge thing in the images. That just excites me in a lot of ways. Yeah. Does anyone else have a question? Don't be shy.
I have one from one of our viewers on YouTube, from Bryce. It's for Ajeuro. It says, your self-portraiture has been highly performative. Given the title of the exhibition, It's Real Because It Happened, what role does performance play in your work in accessing or representing reality?
That's a great question. Thank you, Grace. I don't know, for me, it's an interesting question. I think one of the pieces of feedback that we've been getting as the show's been on for the month has been this recurring theme of almost giving us kudos for some level of bravery that we appear to show in presenting ourselves to the world with these images. But for Deion and ourselves, we've been doing this in such a sort of comfortable personal headspace that it's never felt like we're performing in a way. It feels really genuine and comfortable to us. And it helped me take a step back because it wasn't always the case. I think when I first started making self-portraiture, as anybody is, you're really self-conscious of your perception and the way you present that to the world. You'll take a bunch of photos and then look through for the best one in your own eyes. And so the self-portraiture at the beginning for me was always a way to try and break out of that self-consciousness in a way and just get used to seeing myself in front of the camera and as a photograph, and getting as wacky as I could try to become allowed me to just give away with the seriousness that can come with how I would look at myself in the world. And over time, I had fun looking at how crazily I could make a self-portrait or make myself seem in a space, or get someone to take a second and be like, wait a minute, what's going on? Why is he filming in the middle the corner or something like that. And so it just became a game of playing with my own experience of how I can present to the world, where I got super comfortable in that. And now it's easy for me to do that, where I don't feel like I'm performing. And so in a way, I guess performance takes on a different meaning for me. My every day is me performing to myself of how to kind of be a better person and how to think through the world. And when I look back at these images, I can remember the headspace that I was in and why I thought to make an image in this place. Not because of it being a perfect way to sort of give evidence to an idea that I had, but more so a way of me just getting my thoughts onto paper or into a photo, if you will. It's all these thoughts that are in my head. For me, my notebook is just making self-portraits, putting myself in a space, making that image, and then seeing the image after the fact, and dealing with the emotions that come out of that, good and bad, or what I'm liking, what I'm not liking, and just the continual dialogue that I have with myself in the images comes from the way that I have to keep making these images. It's just the mode of operation helps me get my mind through the process in a way. And so, yeah, it no longer feels like a performance, but I guess in that way, every day is a performance for me.
That's a good point. That's awesome. And just thinking about everything you just said, that made me think of the flip books you both worked on, the back and forth you did. Do you want to talk about that as well?
Yeah, there was a time in the middle of the night. It was like maybe 7 or 8 p.m. And then we both just spent like the whole day taking pictures in front of the wall. And each of us had a roll left in our 35mm cameras, and we met through this experience. And up until that point, we hadn't really had time to talk or figure each other out. And so we thought, hey, do you mind wasting a roll on me? And I'd always loved the idea of playing Nerf, like camera Nerf, just going back and forth and see how many pictures we can take. So we did 3 each, back and forth, until we finished the roll. And we put all the images together into one book for each of us. So my pictures with him and his pictures with me. It's interesting because, at least visually, because my pictures are in color and his are in black and white. And we each have very different perspectives when it comes to portraiture, and it's also interesting to see how we view each other. But at the same time, we're taking the pictures in the same space at the same time. And yet we still ended up with something, 70-something images, completely different images of each other.
I think what was really fun about this for me is, again, when I think about this show, process is something that comes to mind a lot every time because of how many different ways it existed in the project. Dion and I, and Christina as well, the 3 of us all being in the same program just a few years apart, and yet never really running into each other at school. It was interesting, and what was funny is getting together for this project was the first time that the 3 of us had actually gotten together just in general. And so as much as we were getting together to work on an idea, we were also getting together to work on our relationships with each other. And one of the first days in the residency in July, we had come into the space, as Dion said, and tried to almost use this as an icebreaker opportunity. So much of these images for me is about this intimate releasing of ourselves to each other and to each other's lens. It was. I remember getting back these photos from downtown camera, getting the scans, and just being floored by the sort of emotion that came out of these images. I only just met Dion, and here he is giving a part of himself to me in these images. And as we go back and forth, it really was this genuine kind of exploration of how we see each other through the space that we were still working on and building and working within. So there was a lot of evolution there. And so these images, when I got them back, I texted Dion immediately, and this really long paragraph just thanking him for spending that afternoon with me and sharing a part of himself, and seeing how I presented in these images. It just felt really genuine. You wouldn't necessarily know that we hadn't met each other before this, and so these became a beautiful time capsule for me personally. As another element to the exhibition, there's the images of ourselves on the wall, but then there's the images that we made of each other, that we got to know of each other. That was sort of the deeper connection that Dion and myself shared. But then I feel like there was different through lines with each of us. With Josh, I got to know them really well through the building of the wall and their help in that. And then with Christina, I got to know Christina really well through their connection with Dion, and then also our rapport through the Zoom calls, and how open Christina was to always being there for us as a resource, how we could further work on our ability to think about the show. I feel like there were intimate one-on-one relationships with each of you in working with this project. And these books, these small little, this back and forth, books that Dion and I had was that moment there. And so there's just a lot of those like small lines that happened by way of just process and working through the ideas as a whole. They weren't necessarily first ideas for the show, but they're, for me, just as important in the whole process.
Side note, I'm throwing shade. The reason why it's significant that we've never met before is because I'm in a very small school, and we happen to be some of the only Black students at that school.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, you'd think that we had talked before, but we hadn't.
Yeah.
And this was our first opportunity to do that.
I would like to add to that too. Like, there's a huge lack of diversity at our school, and that's another reason why I felt this was important to do. Like, the show was my summer research project for a reason, because I was tired of us specifically in our year being the token Black students and having white old professors being like, oh yeah, of course, this is about the diaspora, right? This is about race, right? And I'm like, no, I literally have a skin condition. That's what it's about. Like, I just want to make work, you know? Like, I want to be afforded the ability to make work that a lot of my peers get to do without having this forced narrative on my work. Like, obviously, there is, like, my identity is very apparent in all of my work because I do a lot of self-portraiture, and I know you can both speak to that. Like, it's not like we're hiding our identities or denying our Blackness. Of course, that's important, but we're so much more than that. Like, we're all very different human beings experiencing different things. Like, my work specifically, like, focusing on my identity as, like, a disabled trans person. Like, there's so many layers behind just being a Black body, and, like, I think that's important to talk about.
I think what's really special there is your openness to share that as well. And that's what was so beautiful about, in addition to your curation, like your overall contribution to the headspace of this show. It really feels like it was inspiring, and like, I don't know how to put this, but it had a lot of weight, you know, in the ways that we would continue to think about the work that we were making. And it really made it feel like Christina was just as much as an artist in this show as Dion and myself. I don't necessarily just look at them as a curator, but it's the three of our show as artists, you know, it's just really filling that headspace. I know I keep using that term, but it's the perfect way for me to describe how this project has come together as a whole.
Yeah, I think the show for me was like a very subtle way of throwing shade at the arts institution as a whole in a very professional manner. Like, we need to keep doing that as like artists of color. Like, it's important to dismantle these systems that have been used to oppress us, you know, that have been used to like singulate us. Like, we are not a monolith. Like, we're complex beings. And I think that's important to express through our art. Yeah.
Is there one thing or multiple things that you think that now that you've kind of come to the almost end of this process, are there things that you know that you picked up here that you're like interested in pursuing, or like lessons that you want to kind of take from the show? And it's okay if you're like, no, I'm finished here. Like that's also very fun. It's really fun. But like, is there anything that you're like, oh, I got this here, and now I know, or whatever? Yeah.
I don't know. A lot of things were first for me in the show. I never framed a print before now, but never built a wall. Never painted a wall for that matter. There's a lot of things I can take from it. I don't know. Just thinking about coming up with a final product. Like I mean, I do it a lot in school, but it never actually turns into anything. It's more of an idea, and this was the first time I got to put those ideas into action. And I don't know, just exercising all the things that have come to learn at school.
For me, I like working with you two made me realize that like I want to do more work for my community in the arts. Like I've been working at the gallery for like 3 years now, and like it's just been like doing background stuff and like editing websites and making promotional material. But like this show gave me the opportunity to like really realize that like curation by Black artists is absolutely necessary in the field I'm in, and like the importance of like peer-to-peer collaboration. Like there's really like no like power dynamic here. There wasn't even a power dynamic really with Josh too. It felt so well. There is technically, but like it felt nice to be working in a space where it felt like I could be myself and that I could express how I was feeling very openly and feel like I could say things and give ideas to you and feel listened to, which is like very hard to feel in an institutional setting, you know? Which is nice, and I think it's really important to have peer-to-peer collaboration because then we get to know each other better. Like this was a great like opportunity to get to know you better as well. Like that's how I feel.
Yeah, I think one thing that helped me a lot with this project was for me putting into perspective where I think self-portraiture for me is going to go, and how I look at these as just moments in my life, and that for that reason I think I'll be making self-portraiture as long as I live, because they're time capsules of where I am in certain stages of my life. But then, in addition to that, getting to know John and Christina through this as well has been a really special experience as well. I think getting to know them and working on this project, I feel like we're only going to continue this relationship going forwards and having other modes of collaboration, the word collaboration, community. It's been a special thing about reaching this point and being able to share it with you, with everyone else, and getting all of your feedback. It's the fact that a show like this, a space like this that we've carved out now, can exist as a meeting ground for like-minded individuals to come together and have conversations. I think that's what excites me going forward, is I'm looking for more opportunities and events like this where a friend of mine that I know personally is doing something cool and they promoted it, and I want to go and support. And then they come and do the same thing, and naturally you build a really beautiful community that isn't waiting for some sort of institution or a higher being with or collective with power that you're looking for as validation can give to you. We can just create that ourselves in a way. And I love the potential for that, what that's inspiring within me going forward. It's like I'm so invested in what the two of you do next. I'll be there in a second way.
That's so sweet. No, I feel the exact same way. Like this was a bonding
Thanks so much, guys, for your. So thank you everyone for coming. Please feel free to stay and vibe out in the show. Just to let you know, we have a couple of calls for submissions coming up that are also supported by our BIPOC Fund, which produced this exhibition in residency. So what we have, we are looking for 3 Black students to work with artist Shaya Shak, who is like a nationally known artist, and she is researching the material history of Black knowledge production against the material history of optical allyship. It's a very cool residency, and I hope you tell people to apply from the grade school. And we also are going to be launching our bread and butter submission